Welcome to Bond and Bondage Helpline, where we untangle human emotions. No safe word required. I'm Stella Black. Hit the like and subscribe buttons for your weekly glimpse behind the curtain of human behavior. Today, I want to talk about something that's both psychologically and biologically harmful, identifying as an incel and maintaining an attitude of hostility toward women. This isn't just about ideology or social labels. It's about how these patterns of thinking and feeling can deeply damage the person holding them. First, from a psychological perspective, when someone adopts an identity rooted in victimhood and resentment, their brain reinforces those emotions over time. Cognitive distortions, such as blaming all women for personal frustrations, believing the world is unjustly against you, or seeing yourself as inherently unlovable, create a mental filter that warps reality. Every negative experience is used as proof that these beliefs are true, strengthening them like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The result? Increased anxiety, chronic anger, and deepening depression. Research on learned helplessness shows that when people believe they have no control over their situation, they stop trying to improve it. This can lead to withdrawal from social life, loss of motivation, and even suicidal ideation. But the damage goes beyond just thoughts. It extends to brain chemistry, nervous system regulation, and overall physical health. Chronic anger and resentment keep the body locked in a heightened stress response, constantly triggering the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight mode. This floods the brain with stress hormones like cortisol and norepinephrine, which, over time, impair cognitive function, increase inflammation, and weaken the immune system. Research has linked prolonged exposure to high cortisol levels with an increased risk of heart disease, high blood pressure, insulin resistance, and even neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's. In essence, living in a constant state of resentment and stress isn't just emotionally painful, it's physically toxic, shaving years off a person's life. Social isolation further compounds this damage. Humans are wired for social connection, and prolonged loneliness has been shown to shrink the hippocampus, the brain's center for learning and memory. Studies using fMRI scans reveal that the brains of socially isolated individuals respond to social rejection in the same way they would to physical pain, activating the anterior cingulate cortex, a region associated with distress. This can lead to increased sensitivity to perceived slights, deepening feelings of alienation and paranoia. Over time, this isolation rewires the brain, making it harder to regulate emotions, experience joy, or even perceive social interactions accurately. The result? A cycle of worsening mental health, further withdrawal, and deeper immersion into online echo chambers that reinforce this mindset. This brings us to another major issue: the neurobiological impact of chronic internet use, particularly within the manosphere and incel communities. The human brain is highly adaptable, and what we repeatedly expose it to shapes our thought patterns and emotional responses. Spending hours per day engaging in hateful rhetoric online triggers dopamine release, reinforcing the habit in the same way an addiction works. Just like gambling or substance abuse, engaging in rage-filled discussions and consuming extremist content provides short-term emotional highs, validation, a sense of belonging, and the thrill of confrontation. But long-term, it leads to desensitization, heightened aggression, and an inability to engage in real-world social interactions without hostility or defensiveness. Moreover, these online spaces operate on algorithmic reinforcement, meaning the more someone engages with angry, misogynistic, or extremist content, the more they are fed similar material. This creates a confirmation bias loop where the brain is repeatedly exposed to distorted negative messages about women, relationships, and society. Over time, this warps perception, making it harder to recognize counter-evidence, empathize with others, or seek alternative perspectives. What begins as frustration over personal struggles becomes neurologically ingrained resentment, leading to chronic dissatisfaction, distrust, and in some cases, violent ideation. Ultimately, this combination of social withdrawal, stress-induced brain damage, and addiction to online negativity doesn't just reinforce suffering, it actively shrinks the capacity for happiness, connection, and personal growth. The brain adapts to what it experiences most, and if all it receives is anger and isolation, that becomes the default state. Breaking free requires a conscious effort to rewire these pathways by engaging in real-life social experiences, seeking positive reinforcement, and focusing on personal development rather than external blame. Breaking free, rewiring the brain for growth, connection, and fulfillment. The good news is that the brain is capable of change. This is called neuroplasticity. Just as negative thought patterns and social withdrawal reinforce themselves over time, positive experiences and new ways of thinking can reshape neural pathways toward healthier emotional regulation, increased social confidence, and a greater sense of personal fulfillment. However, this process requires conscious effort, intentional behavioral changes, and patience. I've spoken about the ways to fight your way out of your mental cage at length last week, so here is a very brief recap. I'd suggest you watch the video from last week if you haven't watched it yet. So what are those methods of escaping the cage of your thoughts? 1. Challenge cognitive distortions and reframe rejection. Many incels fall into a pattern of catastrophic thinking and cognitive distortions, where every rejection, social struggle, or failed romantic experience is seen as confirmation of deep unworthiness. This kind of rigid, negative thinking activates the amygdala, the brain's fear center, making it difficult to break free from cycles of self-blame and hostility. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is one of the most effective tools for restructuring negative thought patterns. Research shows that CBT techniques can rewire neural circuits in the prefrontal cortex, strengthening logical reasoning and reducing emotional overreaction to perceived rejection. Start by identifying and challenging distorted thoughts. Instead of thinking, "Women always reject me because I am unlovable," reframe it. "Not every interaction will lead to success, but that doesn't define my worth." Over time, practicing realistic self-talk can reduce the emotional sting of social setbacks. Remember, social skills are learned behaviors, not innate traits. Studies show that people who see social competence as a skill they can develop are more likely to persist in improving and succeeding over time. 2. Reduce social isolation and rebuild social skills. Gradually. Chronic loneliness rewires the brain to expect rejection, making social interactions feel threatening rather than rewarding. The longer someone stays isolated, the harder it becomes to engage with others, as loneliness shrinks the hippocampus and increases stress responses. However, social confidence can be rebuilt through gradual exposure to new interactions. What is the hippocampus? The hippocampus is a seahorse-shaped part of the brain that plays crucial roles in memory, learning, and spatial navigation. Start small. If real-world socialization feels overwhelming, begin by engaging in low-pressure group activities, such as hobby clubs, volunteering, or gaming communities with positive environments. Studies show that shared activities create incidental friendships, where bonds form naturally through repeated exposure. Practice social micro-interactions. Saying hello to a cashier, making small talk with a coworker, or asking a stranger for directions helps desensitize the brain to social engagement. These small successes trigger dopamine release, reinforcing a positive association with real-world interactions. Shift focus from seeking validation to building competence. Studies suggest that people who approach relationships with a learning mindset rather than a fixed outcome mindset are less prone to anxiety and rejection sensitivity. 3. Reduce online exposure to toxic content and reverse algorithmic conditioning. The manosphere and incel communities operate as digital addiction traps, reinforcing negativity through algorithmic feedback loops. Platforms like YouTube, Reddit, and 4chan feed users increasingly extreme content based on past engagement, strengthening confirmation bias and hostility toward women. What is confirmation bias? Confirmation bias, also known as confirmatory bias, my-side bias, or congeniality bias, is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs or values. Escaping the cycle of anger. Going online, getting the anger amplified, and feeling even angrier requires intentional digital detox strategies. Disrupt the algorithm. If you constantly consume negative, misogynistic content, social media will continue feeding it to you. Break the cycle by deliberately engaging with neutral or positive content. Psychology podcasts, relationship advice from balanced sources, or personal development channels. Over time, this shifts your recommendation feed and alters what your brain passively absorbs. Set strict digital boundaries. Research shows that prolonged internet exposure, especially to anger-inducing content, reduces impulse control and increases aggression. Reduce screen time by setting app limits or using website blockers to break the habit. Replace online rage with real-world learning. Engaging in new activities, such as learning an instrument, fitness training, or skill building, provides a healthier dopamine source than scrolling through rage-fueled forums. Studies show that personal mastery activities increase self-worth and reduce negative emotional spirals. 4. Improve physical health to improve mental health. There is a direct link between physical health and mental resilience, and neglecting physical well-being makes overcoming negative emotions significantly harder. Chronic stress, anger, and social isolation increase systemic inflammation, which has been linked to depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline. Exercise rewires the brain. Physical activity increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which promotes neural growth and reduces symptoms of depression. Even a simple 20-minute daily walk can improve mood, reduce anxiety, and enhance cognitive function. Fix sleep patterns. Poor sleep weakens emotional regulation circuits in the prefrontal cortex, making it harder to manage anger and rejection. Aim for 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep to support better impulse control and emotional stability. Nutrition matters. Diets high in processed foods, sugar, and unhealthy fats contribute to chronic inflammation, which is strongly linked to increased aggression and depressive symptoms. Switching to a diet rich in whole foods, omega-3s, and lean proteins can improve brain function and emotional regulation. 5. Shift identity from victim to active participant in life. One of the most harmful aspects of the incel mindset is internalized helplessness, where individuals believe their situation is unchangeable. However, studies on growth mindset psychology show that people who believe they can improve through effort experience higher life satisfaction and better long-term success in relationships. Reframe rejection as a learning experience. Instead of seeing failure as proof of inadequacy, treat it as feedback for growth. People who adopt this perspective are more likely to persist in relationships and career goals rather than withdrawing into bitterness. Build a personal identity beyond relationships. Studies show that individuals who derive self-worth from multiple sources, such as hobbies, personal achievements, and community engagement, are more emotionally resilient. Seek therapy or support groups. Research has shown that cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, can help individuals challenge negative self-perceptions and build self-compassion. Therapy isn't about blaming yourself. It's about equipping yourself with tools to reshape your mindset and take control of your life. Final thoughts? Reclaiming your life is possible. Ultimately, breaking free from the incel identity isn't about pretending dating is easy or forcing positivity. It's about shifting focus from external blame to internal growth. Instead of feeding rage-driven online algorithms and reinforcing victimhood, take steps that actively reshape your brain and body for success. Science has shown that social skills, emotional resilience, and personal confidence are all learnable. The real question is, will you choose to keep reinforcing suffering, or will you take the first steps toward rewiring your life for fulfillment and connection? That's enough for now. Your scars might be on the inside, but scar patches come in all shapes and sizes. Find your patch and protect them with your life. See you next week.